Young millionaire hastily Wednesday, a homeless girl to escape an arranged marriage unaware she was his greatest destiny. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Rain hammered down on the streets of Manhattan, neon lights smearing across puddles as midnight crept in. Adrian Carter, 28, heir to the Carter fortune, strode quickly beneath the awning of a shuttered cafe. His Armani suit clung damp to his frame, his tie loosened, his expression carved from stone. Tonight should have been a victory, another deal closed, another empire swallowed. Instead, it was a cage. Inside his jacket pocket was the letter his father's ultimatum, written in clipped words that carried the weight of generations. Marry Eleanor Stanford by Sunday, or forfeit your inheritance. An arranged marriage dressed as duty, as tradition. To Adrian, it was nothing but shackles. He cursed under his breath, pulling the collar of his coat tighter against the storm. That's when he saw her. Under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a young woman crouched against the brick wall of the cafe. Her hair was plastered to her face, her clothes soaked through, the thin blanket around her shoulders, no match for the biting cold. At her side sat a torn duffel bag, its zipper broken, spilling out a few shirts and a paperback swollen from rain. She looked up as he passed, eyes wide but guarded, a creature braced for the next blow the world might throw. For a second, Adrian almost kept walking. What did a girl on the street have to do with his war against family expectations? But her gaze held him. There was no plea in it, no practiced desperation, just raw, unvarnished dignity, the kind he rarely saw in the velvet halls of his world. "Do you need help?" he asked before he could stop himself. She straightened, tugging the blanket tighter. "I'm fine," she lied, her teeth chattering. "Please, don't bother." Adrian studied her for a beat. Fine. She was anything but fine. Yet something about the fire in her voice sparked an idea so reckless it made his pulse race. The words left his lips before logic could catch them. "Marry me." She blinked, stunned. "What?" "Marry me," Adrian repeated, his tone steady, almost businesslike. "Think of it as a contract, one signature, and you'll never have to sleep on the street again." Her mouth fell open, then snapped shut. "That's not funny. I'm not joking." He reached into his coat, pulling out a silver band he'd bought earlier that night in a fit of spite cheap from a corner vendor, meant to mock the idea of a forced engagement. He held it out between them, rain dripping from his cuff. "This isn't about love. I need a wife by Sunday. You need a chance. Say yes, and both our problems disappear." The woman Maya, she would later tell him, stared at the ring, her breath visible in the cold. It was insane. He was insane. And yet, behind the madness was something else. A door cracked open, a way out of the darkness that had swallowed her for months. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "You don't even know me." Adrian's jaw tightened. "All I need to know is this: you're not them. You're not part of the world trying to chain me down. That's enough." The storm raged louder, thunder rolling above the city, as if urging her to decide. Maya glanced at her soaked bag, at the empty street, at the stranger offering her a future she hadn't dared imagine. Slowly, she reached out and took the ring. And just like that, a contract marriage was sealed under the rain, two broken souls binding themselves together for reasons neither dared to call love. But fate had other plans. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the streets washed clean, the air sharp with the smell of wet asphalt. Adrian Carter hadn't slept. The weight of his father's letter still burned in his pocket. But now another weight pressed against him, the silver band Maya had accepted. It was ridiculous. It was reckless. Yet for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had done something on his own terms. Maya, meanwhile, lay awake, in the cot of a shelter Adrian had arranged for her, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed to life. Her fingers brushed the ring on her hand again and again. It was cold, too large for her, and every time she looked at it, the memory of his words replayed. "Marry me." Think of it as a contract. She should have run. She should have laughed in his face. But when he looked at her, she hadn't seen pity, only defiance, the same stubborn fire she carried inside. That's what made her say yes. 3 days later, they stood before a weary justice of the peace in a quiet downtown office. No flowers, no guests. Just the sound of a clock ticking and the rain starting up again outside. Adrian signed his name with swift strokes. Maya hesitated, pen trembling in her grip, before pressing it to the paper. With one scratch of ink, she was no longer the girl sleeping under an awning. She was Mrs. Carter. Adrian slipped the silver ring onto her finger again, his touch brief, almost businesslike. "Done," he said, voice flat. "This changes everything." "For you," Maya whispered, not looking at him. "For me, I'm not so sure." That night, Adrian brought her to the Carter estate for the first time. The wrought iron gates creaked open, revealing a mansion that seemed pulled from another century. White stone pillars, towering windows, manicured lawns lit by soft golden lamps. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She tightened her grip on her duffel, feeling smaller with every step up the drive. Inside, the chandeliers gleamed above polished marble floors. Servants moved quietly, stealing curious glances at her worn shoes and threadbare coat. Adrian walked ahead without hesitation, his expression unreadable. When they reached the grand staircase, he finally paused. "This is your home now," he said, though the words sounded like an order more than a welcome. Maya swallowed hard. "It doesn't feel like it." One of the maids led her upstairs to a guest room larger than any apartment she had ever seen. A 4-poster bed draped in silk, velvet curtains that swallowed the light, a closet filled with clothes still bearing tags. She touched a sleeve cautiously, afraid the fabric might dissolve under her calloused fingers. At dinner, the distance between them was measured not only in the length of the table but in silence. Adrian sat at the far end, cutting into filet mignon with surgical precision. Maya stared at her plate, the rich food heavy on her tongue. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "Why me?" Adrian looked up, fork pausing midair. "You could have hired anyone. You could have chosen someone from your world. Why, me?" For a moment he didn't answer. Then his jaw set. "Because you're not from my world. That's the point. You don't have agendas, expectations, strings attached. You're the only person who doesn't want anything from me, except maybe a roof over your head." Maya's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't a charity case. But the truth was, she had needed that roof. And part of her still did. Later, alone in her room, she opened her duffel and pulled out a small keepsake, a photograph of her mother, edges curled from years of wear. She set it on the nightstand beside the silver rings box. For the first time in months, she wasn't cold or hungry or alone on the street. But she also wasn't free. Downstairs, Adrian poured himself a glass of scotch, staring into the fire, crackling in the vast hearth. His plan was working. The board would see he had fulfilled the condition. His inheritance was safe. Yet the image of Maya at that endless dining table haunted him, the way she clutched her fork like a weapon, the way she tried not to be swallowed by the opulence surrounding her. This was supposed to be a transaction. A contract, nothing more. But the longer he stared at the flames, the more he wondered why the thought of her felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Morning light spilled through the velvet curtains, soft gold cutting across the floor of Maya's room. She sat on the edge of the 4-poster bed, shoulders hunched, staring at the closet of untouched gowns. The tags still dangled like warnings. She wasn't a wife here, she was a guest in a museum, expected to play a role she didn't know. Downstairs, Adrian was already dressed in a tailored suit, scanning headlines on his tablet. He didn't look up when she entered the dining room. "You'll need to be ready by 7 tonight," he said simply. "There's a gala at the Stanford Hotel." Her stomach tightened at the name. "Stanford," she repeated. He finally met her gaze. "Yes, my father's business partners. They'll expect us both there. Consider it your first appearance as Mrs. Carter." The words rang heavy in her chest. Not a night for her, not really. A night to prove she belonged in a world she'd never stepped into. Hours later, a stylist bustled around her, tugging pins into her hair, fastening jewels at her ears. Maya caught her reflection in the mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. The girl who had huddled beneath an awning just days ago was gone. In her place stood a stranger in silk, painted lips hiding unease. Adrian appeared at the door, crisp in black tie, eyes briefly flicking over her before he turned away. "We're late," he muttered. "No compliment, no comfort, just business." The Stanford Hotel glittered with chandeliers, champagne flowing, laughter sharp and practiced. Couples glided across marble floors, the air thick with perfume and money. Maya clutched her small clutch tighter, trying to steady her breath. Whispers started the moment they stepped in. "Who is she? Where did she come from?" Adrian ignored them, guiding her toward the long banquet table. His hand rested lightly at her back. Not intimate, but enough to remind her she wasn't free to bolt. Dinner was a blur of polite smiles and sharp questions. One woman leaned forward, diamonds flashing on her wrist. "Maya, was it? Where did you and Adrian meet?" Heat rushed to her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Her story was a contract, a half-truth wrapped in a lie. "She's private," Adrian cut in smoothly, pouring wine into her glass. "That's what I respect about her." The table chuckled, conversation shifting away, but Maya's heart pounded. She hated the way he had to shield her, as if she were fragile glass about to shatter. Later in the evening, it happened. A man, flushed with drink, sneered openly. "Funny, isn't it? Adrian Carter, the golden heir, showing up with a girl plucked straight off the streets." The words sliced sharper than knives. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Adrian's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Maya rose to her feet. "You think being poor makes me less?" Her voice carried across the ballroom, clear, unwavering. "I've worked in kitchens, in laundromats, slept on concrete floors. I know what it means to fight for every breath, every meal. If that makes me unworthy of standing here, then maybe it's this room that needs to rethink what worth really island." Silence crashed over the crowd. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a woman at the end of the table clapped, slow and deliberate. Another joined in. And then the entire hall filled with applause. Adrian stared at her, stunned. This wasn't the frightened girl clutching a duffel in the rain. This was a woman unafraid to face down a room that had never accepted her. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past the tinted windows. Maya sat rigid, hands clasped tight in her lap. Adrian broke the silence first. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she replied softly, eyes fixed on the skyline. "Because if I don't speak for myself, no one else will." For the first time, he didn't argue. He only glanced at her reflection in the glass, seeing not just a stranger in a contract marriage, but someone who had already begun to change everything he thought he knew. The days after the gala moved like a storm, Adrian couldn't quite outrun. Everywhere he went, boardrooms, charity luncheons, the glossy covers of society magazines, there was her face beside his. The girl who had silenced an entire ballroom with nothing but truth. Maya. She carried herself differently now. Still cautious, still clutching her past like a shield, but there was strength in the way she walked through the estate halls, unafraid of the whispers from staff. Adrian caught himself watching her more often than he wanted to admit, how she lingered in the garden with a sketchbook, how she pressed her palm against the cool glass of the library window, as if testing whether this life was real. One evening, he found her on the terrace. The city spread out below, 1,000 lights flickering against the dusk. She didn't hear him at first, too lost in thought. "You handled yourself well the other night," Adrian said quietly. Maya turned, startled, then shrugged. "I just spoke what I knew. Surviving on the street doesn't exactly prepare you for cocktail parties, but it teaches you how to stand your ground." He almost smiled. "Most people in that room wouldn't have dared." Her eyes softened. "Most people in that room have never had to." For a long moment, the noise of the city filled the silence between them. Then Adrian exhaled, his voice lower. "Do you ever think about what this is? Between us?" "Oh." Maya hugged her arms around herself. "A contract, a solution, that's what you said." "Yes," he admitted. But the word felt hollow now. A week later, another test arrived. The Carter Foundation hosted its annual board meeting, a gathering of sharp suits and sharper tongues. Adrian brought Maya, against the quiet advice of his assistant. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing like the jeweled gowns around her. But when she entered the conference room, heads turned all the same. Midway through the meeting, A shareholder pressed him hard. Your marriage. Convenient timing, Adrian. Some of us wonder if this is a stunt to satisfy your father's conditions. The air thickened. Adrian opened his mouth, but Maya spoke first. I don't need to prove myself to you, she said, voice steady. But I will say this marriage isn't a stunt when every day you wake up and choose to stay. That's what I'm doing, choosing. Not for his fortune. Not for your approval. For me, denably. Her words struck deeper than any prepared speech. Adrian saw it in the way the room shifted, grudging respect, settling where doubt had been. And he saw it in himself, something loosening, something that felt dangerously close to pride. That night, as they rode home in silence, rain streaked across the car windows. Adrian studied her profile in the dim light, the way her chin lifted even when exhaustion weighed her down. You didn't have to defend me, he said finally. I wasn't defending you, Maya replied, turning toward him. I was defending myself. The honesty in her voice cut through him, and for the first time, Adrian Carter, the man who had built walls higher than his family's fortune, felt one begin to crack. Autumn came quickly, brushing the city in gold and shadow. The Carter estate looked softer in the October light, its marble edges less severe, its gardens alive with falling leaves. For Maya, days had settled into a rhythm: mornings in the library, afternoons wandering the grounds, evenings at dinners where she was more ornament than guest. But inside that rhythm, something restless stirred. Adrian noticed it too. He often caught her sketching on scraps of paper. Lines of charcoal tracing, rooftops, rivers, faces she remembered from another life. She always closed the book quickly when he approached, as if her dreams were secrets too fragile for his world. One night, after another long dinner with investors, Adrian found her in the gallery room. The walls were lined with oil portraits of Carter's past stern men, regal women, all carved in wealth. Maya stood among them, her second-hand sweater out of place against silk gowns painted in oil. You don't fit here, he said before he could stop himself. She stiffened. I know. He stepped closer. That's not what I meant. I meant, you make this place feel different. Less like a museum. Oh. Her eyes searched his, cautious, but the sting in her voice softened. Careful, Adrian. That almost sounded like a compliment. He laughed under his breath, a rare, unguarded sound. But their fragile truce didn't last. Rumors began to circulate, whispers planted by someone who wanted her gone. A tabloid headline flashed across screens. Carter Heir's wife exposed as imposter. The article claimed Maya had been paid to pose as his bride, that she was nothing but a cover for Adrian to secure his inheritance. Maya found the paper on the breakfast table one morning. Her hands shook as she read it, the words blurring. Is this what they all think? That I'm a liar you hired? Adrian cursed under his breath, snatching the paper away. It's trash. None of it matters. It matters to me. She shot back. Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with anger. You think I don't hear the whispers when I walk into a room? You think I don't see the way they look at me like I'm stealing something that was never mine? He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled back. Maya, tell me the truth, she demanded, tears threatening. When you asked me that night in the rain, was it because you saw me, or was it just because I was convenient? The silence between them was heavier than any storm. Adrian opened his mouth, but the words tangled in his throat. She shook her head, stepping away before he could answer. That evening, she packed her duffel, the same worn bag she had carried from the street, and left the estate without looking back. Adrian watched from the terrace, rain beginning to fall once more. The silver ring still gleamed on her finger as she disappeared into the city night. For the first time, the man who had everything felt the sharp edge of losing the only thing he didn't know he needed. Rain slicked the sidewalks of Manhattan as Maya dragged her duffel through the streets. Taxi lights cut across puddles, horns blared, but she kept walking until her legs ached. The city that once felt endless now seemed to close in around her. By the time she reached the tiny shelter on the east side, the cot they offered was hard and narrow, but at least it was hers. She curled beneath the thin blanket, staring at the ceiling, the silver ring heavy on her hand. Back at the Carter estate, Adrian paced the length of his study. The fire in the hearth had burned low, shadows clawing the walls. Every time he closed his eyes, He saw Maya's face twisted and hurt, her voice cracking as she asked if she was only convenient. He could fight boardrooms, scandals, his father's expectations, but he hadn't known how to fight her doubt. And now? She was gone. The following morning, Adrian faced the board of directors. A rival shareholder, James Stanford, slid a tabloid across the polished table. "Quite a mess you've made, Carter. A wife from the streets? A contract marriage? If this circus costs us investors, the blame will be yours." Adrian's jaw tightened. For once, he didn't defend himself. He thought of Maya standing in that ballroom, unflinching. He thought of her words. "Marriage isn't a stunt when every day you wake up and choose to stay." "I won't let her be slandered," Adrian said finally, his voice steady. "And I won't let this company be built on lies. The truth is, my marriage began as an escape, but it became something else. Something I won't apologize for." The room buzzed with murmurs. James sneered, but Adrian no longer cared. Meanwhile, Maya tried to disappear into the noise of the city. She found work at a diner, pouring coffee for strangers, slipping tips into her pocket just to keep afloat. Yet each night, she pulled out her sketchbook, pages filled with fragments of memory, the Carter estate's tall windows, the ballroom chandelier, even Adrian's profile in firelight. She hated that her hands still remembered him. She hated that her heart did too. One evening, while wiping down a counter, she overheard customers at the booth behind her. "Did you see it? Carter tore up that contract in front of the press. Said he'd rather lose everything than lie about her." Oak. Her rag froze mid-swipe. The words echoed in her chest, sharp and impossible. Later that night, she stood on the edge of the diner's rooftop, the city lights shimmering below. She clutched the silver ring at her finger, replaying his voice in her memory. Maybe she had run too quickly. Maybe she hadn't given him the chance to prove he meant it. Across town, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the skyline. The glass of scotch in his hand went untouched. He whispered her name once, like a confession to the empty room. Somewhere in the same city, under the same rain, both wondered if fate was cruel or if it was giving them one last chance. The morning sun rose behind clouds, but the city never slowed. Maya tied her apron at the diner, forcing herself through another shift. Her hands moved automatically, pouring coffee, refilling water, clearing plates, yet her mind kept circling the same words she'd overheard. Carter tore up the contract, said he'd rather lose everything than lie about her. By noon, reporters crowded outside the glass windows, cameras flashing, voices calling her name. She froze, tray in hand, as a swarm pressed against the door. The manager rushed forward, waving them off, but the damage was done. Customers whispered. A man muttered, "So it's true. The homeless girl really was his wife." Maya's cheeks burned. She yanked off her apron and slipped out the back, heart pounding. The alley smelled of damp cardboard and engine oil, but at least it was quiet. She leaned against the brick wall, clutching her duffel like a shield. For a moment, she wanted to disappear again, to fade into the city's endless noise. But the noise came to her. A black car pulled up, sleek and out of place in the grimy street. The door opened, and James Stanford stepped out. His tailored suit gleamed, his smile sharp as a blade. "So it's true," he drawled. "The famous Mrs. Carter." Maya stiffened. "What do you want?" "Only to warn you," he said, circling her like a vulture. "Adrian may think you're his salvation, but to the rest of us, you're a liability. Walk away for good, and you might spare him. Stay, and you'll drag him down with you." Her fists clenched. "You don't scare me." His smile widened. "We'll see." He slid back into the car, the door slamming like a threat. The vehicle vanished into traffic, leaving her trembling in the alley. That night, Adrian confronted the same man at a board gala. "Stay away from her," Adrian warned, voice low. James chuckled. "She's already halfway out the door, Carter. Women like her don't last in our world. You'll see." Adrian's hands curled into fists, but he forced himself to walk away. Rage wouldn't save her. Truth would. Meanwhile, Maya sat on a park bench, sketchbook in her lap. The pages told her story better than words: the night in the rain, the marble halls, the silver ring that bound and broke her. A tear slipped down her cheek, blotting the paper. She whispered to herself, "I'm not a liability. I'm not." But in the shadows beyond the bench, a camera clicked. Another headline would be born by morning. The city held its breath, waiting for the collision that was bound to come. And both Adrian and Maya, caught between love and survival, braced themselves for the storm James had promised. The headline broke before dawn. Carter Ayers' wife caught in the park, a loan contract marriage crumbling. Papers sold out on corners, social media spiraled, and by mid-morning, the Carter estate was under siege by reporters. Adrian stood at the tall windows, fists tightening around the railing. He had played this game long enough to know who was behind it: James Stanford. But what gnawed at him wasn't the smear. It was the photo itself. Maya on that bench, her face tired, her eyes carrying the same loneliness she'd once hidden under an awning in the rain. He couldn't stay silent anymore. By noon, he called a press conference at the foundation hall. Cameras lined the stage, journalists buzzing like hornets. Adrian stepped up, no notes in hand, no script. The silver band gleamed faintly on his finger, the only prop he needed. "My marriage," he began, voice echoing through the hall, "was not born from fairy tales. It began in the rain, with a desperate choice. I married Maya because I was cornered. I won't deny that." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He continued anyway. "But what began as desperation became the truest thing in my life. She was never a contract. She was never a pawn. She is my wife. And I will not allow anyone, family, board, or rival to strip her of her dignity. Away." With that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet. The contract they had signed weeks ago. Holding it high, he tore it clean in two. The sound cracked like thunder. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes erupted, but Adrian's voice cut through. "There is no contract anymore. Only choice. And every day from now, I will choose her." Across the city, Maya stood frozen in the diner's break room, eyes glued to the television mounted on the wall. The image of Adrian tearing the paper filled the screen. Her chest rose and fell, her hand trembling against her lips. He really said that," she whispered. The cook grinned, slapping the counter. "Girl, you'd better run before someone else snatches him." That night, Maya found herself standing outside the foundation hall. The crowd had thinned. Only the glow of street lamps and the faint hum of traffic left. She hesitated, duffel at her side, heart pounding as the doors swung open. Adrian stepped out, exhaustion etched in his face. His gaze found hers instantly, as if he'd been searching the shadows for that very shape. For a moment, neither moved. Then he walked forward. Rain began to fall again, soft and steady, drumming against the pavement. He stopped just a breath away. "You heard?" he asked, voice rough. She nodded. "I saw." His eyes softened, for once stripped of all armor. "Then you know. No contracts, no lies. Just me asking, will you stay?" Maya's throat tightened. The city roared around them, taxis speeding, horns blaring, but in that moment there was only his face and the truth he had finally spoken. Her hand lifted slowly, brushing the silver ring that had once been a bargain. She whispered, "I'll stay. But only if you mean it." Adrian didn't hesitate. He reached for her hand, holding it tight, as if to anchor them both against the storm. "I've never meant anything more." Lo? Winter blanketed Manhattan in silver. Snow softened the noise of the streets, muffled the endless hum, and turned the Carter estate into something almost gentle. Inside the grand hall, light spilled across canvases lined against the walls. Not oil portraits of stiff ancestors, but sketches, Maya's sketches. Adrian had done it quietly, without fanfare. He'd found her sketchbook tucked between worn clothes in her duffel, every page alive with her hands and her heart. Then, with the help of the foundation, he built an exhibition. Tonight, for the first time, the doors opened not to investors or shareholders, but to neighbors, artists, and strangers who had once walked past her without a glance. Maya stood in the center, breath caught in her chest. The gallery pulsed with warmth, voices rising in admiration. Children pointed at her cityscapes. Veterans studied her portraits. Women whispered that her lines carried something raw and real. Her eyes shimmered as she turned to Adrian. "You did this?" He shook his head lightly. "You did this. I only gave it a roof." For a long moment, the noise of the crowd faded. She remembered the rain-soaked night he had first spoken those impossible words. Marry me. Think of it as a contract. And now, here they were, standing inside a promise that had turned into something real. Adrian reached into his pocket once more. This time, not with the silver band from the street vendor. A new ring gleamed in his palm, simple but radiant. I asked you once in the rain, out of desperation, he said, his voice steady, carrying across the gallery. Tonight, I ask again, out of love. Will you marry me truly, freely, with no contract but our hearts? Gasps rippled through the room, but all Maya saw was him. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, words breaking softly. Yes. Applause thundered through the hall as Adrian slid the new ring onto her finger. Then, with a smile, he lifted the old silver band, threaded it onto a chain, and clasped it around her neck. So we never forget where we began, he whispered. Weeks later, their wedding was small, held not in the Carter ballroom but in the very community center where Maya had once found shelter. The pews filled with faces from every walk of life, staff from the diner, children from the neighborhood, even the cook who had told her to run after him. Snowflakes drifted past tall windows as Adrian and Maya spoke their vows. No scripts, no board approvals, only truth. I choose you, she said, her voice trembling but strong. And I choose you, he answered, every day. When they kissed, the room erupted in cheers. Outside, the city moved on as it always did, but for them, time slowed. The girl who had once slept beneath an awning was now a wife by choice, an artist with her own gallery, and a woman loved not for convenience, but for who she was. And the young millionaire who once thought marriage was a prison had discovered it could also be freedom. Together, they had turned a reckless mistake into the best decision of their lives, their greatest destiny.